Today, what we call one of the activities held by the Confucius Institute at the University of Adelaide. My name is Mopo Gao. What is called cultural conversation. So, what the hell does that mean? I think we might introduce a bit of multicultural elements. So I would say it's some kind of multicultural conversation. Now, the tea and some biscuits things are there. Please do help yourself anytime, although you don't have to all get up to it once, but just have a tea or have something to eat. So we have two bits of activity here. The first bit is a conversation between Mirna and David, and then we have a break for a while, and then I'll have a little conversation with Stephanie. Now, I'm asked to introduce Mirna and David. They're both very good friends of mine. I'll start with David. You know, I think probably people here all know this famous Mao's last dancer, Li Zunxin, right? And one of the comments about Li Zunxin is that it's unbelievable. Yeah? Somebody from rural China and become a dancer and then all over this stage internationally. It's an incredible, unbelievable story. And then one of my office people, Annette, who is not here today, and she read my book, Gao Village. And she said, "You are equally unbelievable." Because I'm also from rural China. Now here we have David. He's not from rural China, he's from Shanghai. But I think his story is also incredible and unbelievable. And he's not from rural China, and therefore he has not suffered a physical poverty or material poverty as I did. But I think because of his family background, in that kind of circumstances, his family and himself suffered a lot, mentally, psychologically. Now, he came to Australia, first to study English, and then gradually one of the figures of culture in South Australia. And, you know, one of the things he did is, it's becomes a tourist spot. It's the Random Lantern, as you all know. And actually, the Confucius Institute logo is done by him as well. You can see how elegant and beautiful it is. And also, some of his design at the Adelaide airport, as some of you can recognize that. This only, I only list some of the tiny things he's done. Okay?
Give me the credentials.
Mirna is at the moment the director, manager of the Arts and Heritage Collection at the University of Adelaide. And she worked as the executive director of the Nexus Multicultural Arts Center for 10 years. And she's actually a migrant like me and David from Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, of a Croatian background. And she's a graduate of the University of Adelaide and with honors degree in anthropology and graduate deep in education. So first of all, I'm not going to say more about them, okay? Let them tell you the stories about themselves. And I have no idea what they're going to say. So please welcome David and Mirna.
Thank you, Mobo. We're just going to mic up. We haven't used this space for a little while, and we arrived today to find a whole new system. So I'm hoping it will all work. Thank you. How is this? Excellent.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you.
I just need to readjust myself. I had a nice position before, now I'm a bit crumpled. But good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted that we have a fabulous audience. And I think David and I were obviously far too modest and thought nobody would want to come and listen to our ramblings and sort of exploration of our friendship and our migration experience. But I think to begin our conversation, I should say that coming to Australia also meant learning and getting to know Aboriginal culture. And I have to say, in my experience, and in my first visit as a tourist, visiting my family here in Adelaide, nobody mentioned Aboriginal people. I didn't meet anybody, didn't know anything about them. So it wasn't really until I started the university here in the University of Adelaide as a student, and I worked in the museum, South Australian Museum, as a volunteer, that I realised there was a whole other history of Australia that I didn't know. So it's to kind of mark that I'd like to bring your attention as well to the fact that we are on Kaurna land, and that the University of Adelaide 4 campuses are on Kaurna land. Wade campus, Teverton, Rosewoody and North Terrace that we are on now. And that the university itself as an organisation is really very much dedicated to pursue reconciliation, to acknowledge the connection that Kaurna people have to the Adelaide Plains, which is the land that we are on, and that in this spirit, David and I, as migrants, are talking about our own experience today. David and I go back to the early 1990s. I started working at Nexus Multicultural Arts Centre. We were brand new migrants, I suppose. David, when did you come here?
I come here in 1990. 2 years in Brisbane, then come here in 1992. So there was, I think this will just start in the Nexus, I think.
So, in a sense, David was a fresher migrant than me, because I came in 1979, and I had some time to acclimatise and do some university studies, but in a sense, I didn't really come into my own until I started working at Nexus. And we really met over arts. So, David, tell us a little bit about your beginnings.
The beginning quite interesting. I come here in 1990 as after 10 Square UNESCO, and that's probably one of the reasons I decided to leave the country. Politically, it's a little bit incorrect, but that's a reality. Because of my family background, at that time, the Communist Party opened through reform doing quite well. But 10 Square UNESCO made me suddenly shocked me, so the door can't be there open. And only way I can go is leave the country. I tried Japan, I tried America, but wasn't very successful. And then I tried Australia. I didn't know anyone in Australia at all, didn't know any culture, whatever. Only little things I learned about Australia, that was through my high school history book, 1 page about Australia. I even didn't know Brisbane, and I decided not going to Sydney and Melbourne because I thought too many Chinese there. I want to go to a place that have less Chinese. Here, I came to Australia. It's quite interesting. When finally I got a visa, finally I got air tickets, I get on the airplane. There's an older man and his wife sit beside me. And he asked me, young man, where are you going? Are you going to Hong Kong? Which I was 30 at that time. I said, no, I'm going to Australia to study. And the one was his through to me said, don't come back.
That's a rather kind of shocking point to...
I suppose it's, you got to make a decision when you go to another country. Do you want to be one of them, or you don't want to be one of them? You want to be tourist, or you want to be traveler? You got to make a decision.
I think it's rather interesting that you're saying you didn't want to go to Brisbane or to Melbourne or Sydney where there's a lot of Chinese. Yeah. That was very similar to my feeling of coming here and thinking, I'm making this huge step. I know I won't have money to go back, so I have to make it work. And if I decide to go and spend my time in Australia in the Croatian club, I will not go anywhere. I need to actually have an Australian life. And that does mean having my Croatian culture and doing Christmas Eve and doing various kinds of things. But it is really about becoming, bringing the two together. So that's something that David and I actually had in common when we first met, that we knew that we wanted to be Australians with the particular cultural background. Yeah. So what did you think you needed to really have on your mind to achieve that?
Well, that's challenging. I think you've got to open your mind. You've got to, we're a human being. I suppose we all grew up in a particular way and brought up by a particular way. So therefore, when we turn to adults, we become quite judgmental. We judge it by what we have learned. And I think to be new migrant, you have to be really open. You've got to question your own value. If you use your own value to judge new things, to judge new experience you never had before, then you have a problem. The problem is quite severe because we always select something we feel familiar with. We reject something new because we all have fear. The fear of losing our own identity, or fear losing our own culture, or fear losing our own value. Even though our value probably is not universal. I think that's quite important. You've got to open your mind. It's quite interesting. I always remember one story I learned. In Mexico, a young girl is going to get married the next day. The night before, the mother called the girl and said, "You come here, I need to talk to you." And the mother told the daughter that tomorrow is a very big day for you. It will be a new experience for you. Something will happen to you you never had experience before. And don't reject that. They might shock you, but if you just go along, you might have great joy. I think this story is a sort of metaphor, how you accept new things. You know what I talk about. It's something new. You got to. I think that something new you got to not just for it or just against it. You got to be there, be part of it. Therefore, in the end, you become part of them. Did that answer your question?
Yes, yes. But I'm also interested in, you know, those the things that one, when you actually come here and integrating into the community, and that in itself is quite a challenge for not being from here in lots of ways. And I'm interested in how did you actually break through? Because you did that so successfully.
I don't think I break through actually. I think I just accepted whatever happened to me. So therefore in the end I've been accepted too. And I think if you want to be, particularly for new migrants, if you want to be accepted by this culture, by this group, by this society, first what you need to do, you have to accept this society, this culture, this group. Otherwise, no way they will accept you. And I had so many, not just Chinese, the other culture, when they come here, they quite criticize the local culture. Then I was thinking, if you keep criticizing on them, therefore you will not learn their culture. Therefore, you can't be one of them. Therefore, they will not accept you. That's the reality. It's like, you fall in love with someone. You've got to accept the other person. Therefore, other person will accept you. You can't just, I love you, but I keep criticizing on you. Therefore, it never works.
Well, I hope everybody's taking note of that good advice and correct your ways immediately. I know Margaret, I guess, step up to it.
Well, on the other hand, you've got to accept things, like I say. I'm lucky. I married an Australian woman, Helen, and probably lots of you know. I think that the marriage is important. By marrying someone, it's different from your own culture. Therefore, it's acceptance. Therefore, you try to build a new karma. It's not just become one way or the other.
But I think that partnership with another person in life, coming from another culture, especially if they come from the place where you've just shifted, it does actually give you opportunities to immerse yourself a little bit more and in some ways take on some things, gain confidence in communication, in writing, in visiting people. And I know when we were working together at Nexus, and David actually, we sort of developed our professional and personal friendship through David being a graphic artist and an artist. And actually I remember your first time we spoke was a Nexus Multicultural Arts Centre members exhibition. And David had an artwork in it. And I don't think you've ever put an artwork in it ever again. But that first meeting was through that. And that's when David started actually working with us to develop a whole image for the organisation and invitations and flyers, etc. And now I've lost my train of thought on what I was going to ask you. But I think it's really about the kind of cultural things that you bring with you through your professional career, and that kind of partnership with Helen. Does that actually open some of the doors of understanding how you go about within that professional realm?
I think that's for sure. I think the Bias of Mary Helen has opened lots of doors, particularly in arts area, and open my mind in how to look at Western arts. And all my knowledge about Western arts is what I learned in China, which means through a certain filter. And when I come here, wow, it's like a flood come over me, and it was quite amazing. And I think I'll come back to open mind. It's all about the open mind to something new, to something that's uncertainty. I quite like John Cage's quotes. He said, our world comes, whatever comes next. We've got to have this braveness, welcome whatever comes next. We are, yes, sometimes we are so biased, so judgmental, particularly to something we're not familiar with. Answer the question?
Yeah. Now, may I remind you, we are in a cultural conversation here, and I know David and I are talking, but you all are here as well. So I would be very happy if you help me prod him along and get to some things that are of particular interest to you. So please feel free to give me a little sign, and you can contribute to the conversation. David, we were And I know Glenn Stafford from Confucius Institute, he is very keen about your art practice, and he was very keen about hearing a little bit more of what you brought with you culturally and how you then applied it into your graphic art practice. And now we're sitting in front of a beautiful photograph by David. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that aspect.
Okay, I think sometimes we are so much focused on the culture we bring in. But if we really been open, the culture we bring in only part of the culture of the world. And I think that it's all the unity rather than division. I think if my Chinese background contributes to my art practice, it's more sort of aesthetic value. It's a little bit oriental value. It's about harmony. In Western culture, sometimes arts, they more talk of shock value, even though nowadays lots of Chinese arts is about shock value. But for me personally, I more like the harmony, the balance. Not Japanese art, like Chinese art. I think that's important to me personally. When I design, I always think about these something, how they think the work rather than have the shock value. That's all. The rest is very practical things. I went to university to study all the technical things.
So where did you do that?
1993, finished 1996. That's quite an important part.
Here in Adelaide?
In Adelaide, University of South Australia. I think for every migrant, I think go to the local university is quite important. It's not just to learn the technical part, also it's transform yourself, reinvent yourself. Studying in university is not just go to there to learn technical parts, it's learn spiritual parts, to reform your mind, and to question your own value. That's very important. If someone can't question their own value, can't challenge their own value, that person never grow. That's my view.
That's an interesting point. My most vivid experience here at the University of Adelaide was studying something called Physics, Man and Society with Dr. Raymond. And I was fresh migrant, it might have been 1981. And he said to me afterwards, so what do you think about this? And I thought, nobody has ever asked me in my previous experience at the university what I thought. Thinking in a Yugoslav university was just not the kind of thing. You just regurgitated, and you made sure you knew how to retell whatever the topic was. And I can still hear his voice, and he still, when I speak to him on the phone now, because we're in contact, and he's a great supporter of art and heritage collections, I can always hear his voice. And what do you think? And for me, that critical aspect to education and to professional life has been very challenging. Wonder if you can, David, reflect a bit on that, learning that criticality in thinking.
It's for me the turning point. I remember the first year in the university and had public lecturing, and this lecturer talking about is what is good design. So then every student had to talking about what's good design. I come from China. I was only one of two Asian students in our group. The other one from Hong Kong. And I was just not there enough to stand up and say what is good design, because I didn't have a clue. And so I was just sitting there, write and write and write. And the whole lecture finished. And then the lecturer said, look, I was waiting for him to give me the answer, really, so I can learn. And when the lecture finished, he said, probably by the end of this semester, you will have a little clue what's a good art design is. I was so angry. I was so furious. I said, what's going on? I was sitting there for 2 hours. I got nothing at all. That was a really interesting experience. Then I went back to my wife and I said, well, what's going on? How the university works here? And she explained to me, no, they'll ask lots of questions and you got to find an answer. And suddenly, like for me, the hallelujah. Oh, that's it. That's it. You know, so after that, I just really learned. I think that for particular people come from monocultural country, particularly history rich, Chinese, Japanese, you know, even Indian, this kind of country, quite often we have a particular set of value. The value is quite heavy. For Chinese, we have 5,000 years written culture. We've all been taught in a particular way. And it's quite interesting this time I went back to China. I just come back 2 weeks, 2 days ago, been there for 2 weeks. I had one friend, Chinese. He'd been here for 6 years. He told me one experience that really frustrated him. He drove one of his Aussie friends home, drove him home, and then the Aussie friends just said, all right, thank you, goodbye. Then he went in the house, and so he, meanwhile, removed the car, drove back. He was so angry. I said, why are you angry about it? He said, well, in their part of culture, you got to see people drive away. I said, well, then I said, in Australia culture, you got to see these people walking to the goal. Safe. Then I said, if we two cultures judging each other, someone always wrong. So you've got to understand the difference. That's very important. Actually, there's nothing wrong or right. Both of them right. But we are so judgmental. We all think I'm right, you're wrong. I remember years ago, I drove the car, listening to radio. They talk about the divorcing case in Australia. 80% case in Australia divorce, not because bigger things, for small things. So small until to something like the way they hang the towel in the bathroom is different. So therefore, the one person criticizes on the other. When I heard that, I thought, wow, how interesting, how interesting. Is that true? When you have partners hang the towel differently, you criticize on them?
I think you'd have to have a whole host of little things adding up when you just tips it over. Okay. Is that so important? That's right.
Is that important? I don't know. Sometimes I wonder, is that important? Compared with the life and death, that's nothing at all. As Chinese say, you got to die once. You got to die once. And then you come back. Suddenly you see the life different. I think that's quite, you know.
So I suppose coming to a new country is about seeing life differently?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Lots of people come here, they don't see it. They bring their culture in, insulated by their own culture and language. I have a couple of Chinese friends. When I went to their home, as soon as you walk their gate, you feel like you're in China. Everything Chinese. The TV is Chinese, radio Chinese, the sound that they play Chinese, all the book in the house is Chinese. So they're insulated. They sometimes are wondering why you come here. I'm not sort of, you know, say it's wrong, but why you come here? Just for the fresh air or something more? It's depending how brave you are. Like tourists go traveling around too. They just go there, have a look. I will come here just have a look for a period of 5 years, 10 years time, or 50 years time. Where will I one day? What kind of life do we want?
So embracing.
Embracing whatever happens.
Yeah, we've got a question, David. Margaret.
It's just what as we see the large number of international students who come to our university, it worries me so much, worries a lot of us, that they walk around in an insulated group. I would love them to hear what you're saying as kind of an introduction to Adelaide and to open up to, and we need to open up as well in response. But do you think it's partly a confidence thing that you felt confident to do that, and there's a real security in staying with a group of people that feel familiar?
I think yeah, it's confidence, comfortable, suppose. Comfortable with the similarity, and based on the fear of the uncertainty, fear. People are quite scared if they lose their own identity. They do, culturally, personally. Therefore, they don't want to suddenly swimming in the sea. They don't know how deep either. But I think one thing is important for them to hear what I say. Also, it's important for everyone to help them to realize this issue. But we don't. Australian people are so polite. And I remember sometimes my wife say, oh, so-and-so, being here so long, still doing this kind of things in a particular way. Then I say, is anyone told them? No, nobody will tell them. Why we don't tell them? Yes?
But I don't think necessarily it's up to the newcomers to sort of fit in. In my experience, and I know lots of foreign students, and I have been a foreign one myself in USA and Canada.
Yeah.
But I think it's up to the host people to make sure that they're invited home,
Yes.
and that they're taken care of, during festival time, Easter and Christmas and things like that. Invite them home. And I don't see that much going on. I saw more in USA than I do here. And I'm fourth generation Australian.
Well, Adelaide is particular. I remember come down from Brisbane. It takes half a year people to invite you to have a cup of tea. Is that a rule? I'm sure you're familiar with that. People quite not like when I was in Brisbane. People much open. But here is very polite, very formal.
I just, in that, I also think when David and I came, we were kind of, David was a little bit older, but I was about 20, 21. And I came from a place where I knew everybody. I had all my friends from high school, and we all went to university. There was a whole cohort of people. But all of a sudden, I went to a new place, and the university in particular, everybody already knows everybody else. It's you who are not really, you don't have any connection. And it's really hard to break into the groups, especially that kind of early adult groups. People already are so bonded, and there is just no room. I only really had, from that first year psychology studies here, 400 people first year psychology. I've only met 2 people in that group, and there's tutorials, twice weekly lectures. I only met 2 people, and I still see people here now, work colleagues, they're my colleagues now here, that I was in that class. They still don't know me.
I think
that's 20 years, 30 years on.
Well, that's
so
the reality.
It's breaking into that groups is very, it's a complex thing.
I think that's reality. I think we mix up 2 things. One is sort of you connecting professionally or socially. The other part is more like friends. They are 2 different kind of things.
Talk about friends.
Suppose we have friends, but we don't have many friends. That's the reality. Friends, you have different level of friends. Some friends you can talk about your profession. Some friends you can talk about your family things. Some friends you can talk about your personal issues. Someone you can talk about your soul. They're all different levels.
Do you think that kind of bicultural situation has effect on it?
I think the fact, not necessarily. If you're on your monoculture, you still have this kind of different levels of friends. Yes.
I'd just like to go back to inviting people for a cup of tea and suggest that the host people are almost as fearful as the visitor, and people might very well be apprehensive about inviting somebody into their house. You know, is my house suitable, or you know, is the food I offer acceptable, or will the language barrier create an awkward situation that I can't deal with? So there is fear in the heart of the host as well.
Yes, I think that's normal. People fear. We all live on fear of everything, and people who have fear of their own appearance. They always feel like how people were judging me. Come down to the conference. Who cares, really? I don't care how you're judging me. I don't care. And I think we all needed to be strong to try to see our own dream, because we only live once. Don't live on someone else's shoes. That's me. That's very much me. And I think Steve Jobs' speech on the Stanford University really hit me. I've been, listen to what he said again and again. Your times are limited. Do something radical. Do something for yourself. Who cares who else think of me? No. As long as you don't rob people, don't killing people, don't just treat people badly for your own benefit, which they're against my principle. The rest are all fine.
We've got Nick and...
Sorry.
Yeah, no, go.
Thank you, David. I find that you really opening your heart here, and what I hear from you is really very insightful.
Thank you.
I myself came here in 1974, from the former Soviet Union. That was during the pinnacle of the Cold War, and I felt straight away there was coldness around me, and I felt that it was coming from suspicion. People just, especially younger people, didn't trust me, because obviously they were brainwashed by
anti-communist.
By their society, like we were. I was washed by my society where I grew up. I didn't go to university here because I already graduated university in the Soviet Union. But what I found was that people of older generation, obviously, of course they heard about everything which was going on, but they also had their inner wisdom, which was given to them by their life experience. And I found that I was more readily accepted by older generation of people, and I was 20, in my late 20s myself in those days. And I was accepted by older people much more readily than by people of my generation. And I felt that it was quite strange. I couldn't understand for a long time why it was. But then I found that, as I said, older people had their own inner wisdom, the wisdom which was given to them by life experiences. And they looked at me not from the point of view, or you are here to compete with me, but from the point of view, okay, you're just another human being who will contribute to our society by doing your work, by bringing up your children, by contributing in the way that you can. So that was my personal experience, and it resonates a lot, of course, with what you say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nick.
The question I'd like to ask both of you, but also would apply to the woman in front of me, and what you just said. In the time period that you've been in Australia, the countries you came from have changed dramatically.
Yeah.
And I want to ask how that has impacted on your life experience. These are changes which you could not always have predicted at the time that you came here. So it's partly a question about how you remain connected to the changing societies that you bring with you.
So the question is about how do we connect, how do we deal with the changes in our country of origin, and how do we respond as people here to those changes?
I think it was quite interesting. I just come back from China a couple of days ago, and I saw the change greatly. From financial point of view, I quite regret I come to Australia. But from spiritual point of view, I don't. Let's come back to the question why I come here. I don't think I come to Australia for financial benefit. I come to Australia for spiritual reason. I come here to seek a kind of freedom. The freedom is not money you can buy. Then come back to the lady's question about communists, talk of the bias. It's quite interesting. Suddenly, hours later, I developed this mind. I thought, quite often it's not wrong, it's right. You make a decision here, there. Even the communist is, we all think it's quite bad, even though I personally suffered a lot in that time. But you look back, now in China, still communist. But they do something greatly for their people. And we're still judging them by our sort of political value. And meanwhile, I still quite question the American quite so surprised the Middle Eastern had to be democracy. I was wondering, can democracy really survive in the Middle Eastern? I'm not sure. If you give all Chinese the power to vote, what will happen? You will ever question this. Democracy is a great value for Western society. It still has some value in this country. I don't know. If we talk about communist party kill the people, but Australia killed the Aboriginal in Tasmania greatly. How we value that? How we judge this? Is value of the one value against the other?
I think your question, Nick, really brought us to something that's always been of great interest to me, and I think, well, David and I have talked about that often, and that's actually realizing all of a sudden that you are really between the two cultures. You're never really fully here, fully Australian, and you're never really fully Croatian or Chinese or Russian anymore. And it struck me once I was ringing Yugoslavian Airlines, or Croatian Airlines, and I needed to check something, and I put on my Croatian, fluent in Croatian, I can speak it. And this person went off to look for somebody else to help me. And she put the phone down, and I could hear them talking. And she said to her colleagues, "Hey, there is somebody trying to speak Croatian." And I thought, well, they're actually right, because it was now Croatian, it was no longer Yugoslavia, the language was different. There's a host of new words that utilize that I've never heard of before, and I have to look them up. And all of a sudden, I realized that in fact my life and my cultural life is between those two places, and it's something quite hybrid, really. And I wonder, David, whether in sort of going towards 2 o'clock and rounding up, whether we could maybe just talk about that hybrid space.
I think once you're migrant forever. And don't try to fix where you should stay. You're part of it. You're like birds. When summer, you fly to north, south, and in the winter, you fly to north. You got to be part of this. And lots of people struggling for that. They try to stay something which they belong, or they try to fit in something was not they grew up with. They're struggling. You got to be part of like birds. You're flying. whatever suits you. You've got to accept that. Yes?
You know, I lived in Canada for a number of decades, and the Canadian government has a slogan, celebrate our differences. And I think that's a good way to go. I personally find it lively and stimulating to be with people from all sorts of countries. You know, we are sort of a pea soup or an alphabet soup of people by now. Canada is a country of enormous immigration, totally multicultural. It's great fun.
Yes. Yeah, I'll take the comments. The lady behind you.
I'm just thinking of when I lived in Germany, the word Heimweh for homesickness, but then they've got a word Fernweh for longing for, you know, another distant place, and that I think can, I don't know, we don't use that word in the same way, but it sums up a bit about, you know, longing for where you're not, I guess, still having that connection, even though you're not there at the moment.
That's human being, human nature. We're all looking for belonging.
I also think in that belonging, when you're longing for that, you're also romanticising about what you think or what you think you remember how it was. And I think that romantic notion of your country of origin or your hometown, and we've all gone somewhere where we've been, and you think, this is not a big street, this cafe is quite ordinary, but how you kind of picture it in your head is quite romantic at times, and makes you rather nostalgic often, or less often.
Yes.
So David, do you find that you're still struggling to establish your identity in Australia? Or was there a time, or was there an event, or a series of events, where you felt I made it?
Well, I'm not sure if I feel made or I don't feel made. It doesn't bother me at all. First 5 years I was struggling, I must say, you know. But eventually you got to accept whatever happened to you. It's depending on your definition of you being made. The definition of you is successful. Someone's successful measured by money. Someone's measured by social recognition. Someone measured by the professional, you know, the status. But it's all depending on in your heart. Do you feel comfortable with it? Comfortable with yourself? I think that's very important. Lots of people don't feel comfortable with themselves. Therefore, they never feel they're successful. I feel comfortable with myself. Maybe you can say that I made it.
What about when you go back to China, where you feel, in a sense, that you've come home, that you're more Chinese, or do you feel
I don't feel I come home when I went back to China. I feel comfortable, I feel familiar, but I don't feel it's home anymore. Because my parents died before I came to Australia. At that time, my only brother was in America, so I left, just like I'm the last person I'm going. I give all valuable things to my friends. I say I'm going, I never come back. That's it. So I'm moving on. So nothing sort of hang there for me to go back. I came in 1990, then 1993 Helen had an artist in residence in China, so I went there for 3 months. After that, 14 years I didn't go back. At that 14 years I hardly speak Chinese. Even though that time I talked to my brother on the phone, we speak English. And in 2005 I went back to China. I hardly can speak the language for this week. And I went to the South Australia government Shanghai office. I walked in, asked them, do you speak English? It was weird. They were Chinese, but I just couldn't speak the language. And after that, it took me about half a year, constantly talking to pick up.
It's quite an interesting contrast to, remember both of us trying to learn business English. Just writing those letters and knowing how to switch your thinking into the Anglo way of presenting any thoughts. I don't know about in China, but in Croatia, we like beating around the bush. It takes a long time before you actually can say what you actually want to say. And that's not, I don't know.
This part, yes. Sometimes struggling, I can't translate. Still can't translate. Because certain things I can't translate back. I remember the first couple of years, someone told me, now one day, if you can have a dream in English, then your English will be good. And it was a funny thing. The last few weeks, I had a dream in China. I talked to all my friends, but everyone in my dream, they all speak English. Chinese, they never speak English. Those are weird. They all speak English.
Well, we're sort of coming towards 2 o'clock, and nobody really has had any refreshments. And I've got 2 very quick questions for David.
Here comes the truth.
Well, no. It's very easy. You can say, well, what I've written here is that I wondered whether you had any advice for people migrating. But I also would like to hear from you, looking back, would you do it again? Migrating, that is.
Yes, I would do it again. Definitely. If you live in one culture only for your life, it's a shame. It's a shame. It was too young than me.
That's right.
And I think you got to make a decision. Why? When you go to another country, you got to make a decision. You want to be part of it, or you want to be tourist. If you want to be tourist, you will suffer for your life, definitely. If you want to be part of it, then you will love it.
Well, that's a very positive note to stop on. Unless, David, there is some burning thing you wish to say.
No.
But I think this might be a good way to stop. And for all of you maybe to have a personal moment with David. This was a personal experience, and it was an intimate conversation about very deep things for both of us here. But you might like to talk to David yourself over a refreshment, and then we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes. And Professor Mobagao and Stephanie Britton of Artling will do their little presentation and tell us all about their great venture with the Artling magazine and its Chinese incarnation. So on that note, I'd like to thank David so much for sharing his personal experience with us, and I hope that we'll see him again in our program. And I'd like to thank, of course, Mobagao and the Confucius Institute and all the people involved in it in working with us as true partners to bring to you, our audience, in such wonderful conversations, wonderful artists that we did in the past. And just recently, if you've been here for Chinese poetry and music, that was an absolute splendid delight. So thank you to Confucius for being our dear friends. And thank you all for coming today to join us for the conversation.
Let's start the second part of the cultural conversation. This is about introducing Aboriginal art into China. Let me say a couple of sentences about this, because the Chinese, as Verna was saying before she came, she never knew about, when she thought about Australia, never thought about Aborigines. Right? Actually, the Chinese don't have or didn't used to have the Aboriginal in mind either. In fact, for a long time, when the Chinese are thinking of trying to reform China and catch up with the world in China, catch up with the world, the Chinese always think of the West, America, Europe, England, Germany, Japan. They don't think about Asian countries, Africans, let alone the Aborigines. So, as soon as I heard about from Stephanie Britton, who is going to speak in a minute, about this issue of arts link and translating into Chinese and bringing it to China, I was very, very keen. I think this is a very good opportunity to see how, first of all, to see how different Aboriginal art is, and secondly, to educate Chinese that the West, or the world, is not just the West. The world includes all other kinds of people and all kinds of cultures. So there you go. So first, I have two Stephanies here. Stephanie Heruc, who is the editor of this special issue. This is the English version, this is the Chinese version. And we'll talk about the Arts Link, this magazine. And actually, Stephanie Britton went to Chengdu, where they hold this Australian Studies Conference. And actually, they hold Australian Studies Conference in China once every 2 years. And so, Stephanie would tell us what happened there and her experience and how this was received enthusiastically by the Chinese. And how the Chinese, we're talking about, David talking about speaking Chinese or English, how the Chinese delegates all spoke very good English.
Yes.
And whereas some of the academics from Australia probably didn't speak that well. So first, let's welcome our first Stephanie Heruc to say a few words about.
I haven't prepared anything to say. I've just asked to say a few words, so that's what I'll do. I've been looking at Aboriginal art since about 1980 or something like that, and so I've got a long experience in it and a long interest in it. And I've been working for ArtLink for more than 20 years, and ArtLink did a issue in 1990 on Aboriginal art, and then again 10 years later, and then another one for 10 years later, and I kept saying we should be doing one every year because it's such a important part of art in Australia, and because it's really a new genre of art in the world, Aboriginal art. And so it needs its own place to speak about, and so many things happening, especially in Australia and outside Australia, because lots of things happening internationally. So Daniel Browning, people have probably heard him on Radio National. He's on Away, and he's been working at for the ABC for many years. He's Indigenous Australian, and I'm a non-Indigenous Australian, but I have the migrant quality, of course, like everyone else. And so the two of us edited together, and I think this makes something. I mean, Daniel did one by himself, which was called Black on Black for ArtLink, with Stephanie sort of standing up beside him some of the time. And Tess, alas. And but this issue, because these two issues, or well, there's one more, is the both of us, and we've both got the sort of a breadth of connections and a breadth of perspective on it that I think makes a very strong outcome. So maybe the case, people think that all Indigenous productions should be done by all Indigenous teams, and I think that sort of ebbs and flows a bit, people thinking about that. But I think that what we've done is something that will continue to be valuable forever, really, because magazines are like books, really, more than a magazine, not like something you throw away. It's like something you keep. And if you look back at the 1991, a lot of the issues that were flagged in that are still ongoing, and yet we've got that record of it from 30 years ago. So I'm here to answer any questions if anyone's got any questions later on.
A very concise account of a project that we've been down many roads with together, and a very interesting and exciting run. So I wanted to just, Mogogao was very, as he said, very interested in this project, and earlier on this year when we were developing it. And he said, look, when you come back from China, you've got to come and tell us what actually happened. So this is why I'm here today, to tell you what actually happened, but also to say a little bit about how it happened and why it happened, and why, what were the circumstances that created this rather strange outcome of a magazine, Australian art magazine on Indigenous art, which is fully in Mandarin, not a word of English in it. So I'll just briefly tell you how it occurred. It started with two inspirational leaders, and these things often happen this way. We don't do things on our own. In 2011, the producers of Late Night Live, I'm sure everybody in this room knows Philip Adams and listens occasionally to Late Night Live, they sent this living cultural treasure to China for about a month. And he was to record, in the end, 18 different programs, hour-long programs about China. So he interviewed people from many walks of life, every sort of thing, farming, agriculture, politics, architecture, art museums, food, fashion, and even sport, I think. And it seems to me in retrospect that the flow on from those China interviews has been enormous. I hear about it all the time, and it's probably more informative and more sort of exciting to Australians to listen to those things than any number of sort of bilateral exchanges, books and newspaper articles. Several of the programs were about the very big changes in art and culture, and by chance the only ones that I actually heard live one of them was about a new art magazine that had arisen in China called Leap, and I was very interested to hear about this because unlike the sort of explosion of art magazines in China that had happened, which were really all about hot artists and who's who in the art world and basically around the commercial gallery scene. Leap was published in both English and Chinese, and it was sort of a partnership between an artist's society, sort of traditional, like in China they had the guilds and the societies of artists, I suppose like we did in the West, and a university. So it was more like an art magazine for the thinking people. And it was the idea was to sort of reflect on what was happening in contemporary art rather than on the art market. So I found that fascinating, got in touch with them and immediately set up an exchange subscription for ArtLink. But it was the second interview that I heard that really stopped me in my tracks. Philip Adams went to Raymond University in Beijing, and he interviewed a group of 7 postdoctoral graduate students in Australian studies. Now, although I'd been to China about 4 times before that, the first time to launch our magazine, The China Phenomenon, which was about new Chinese art, and I'd visited art fairs and big exhibitions and so on. The people I met seemed to know absolutely nothing about Australia, let alone about Australian art. And I had really never dreamt that there was this thriving sort of sector that was powering away in the universities of all these people who were studying us. And not only that, but they saw their futures in Australia and in relation to Australia. Their English was absolutely immaculate. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and the way that they were talking about why they were interested in Australia and how people used to sort of look at them in rather bemused fashion to say, "Why are you studying Australia?" But anyway, they regarded themselves as somehow being against the grain in doing that. And they talked about the PhD subjects they were studying, and again, it was astonishing. They were not sort of academic treatises about historical things. They were about current issues like domestic violence in Aboriginal communities and the alienation of the Aboriginal male, and things like that. And they also had this great sense of humour, and I thought, well, this is wonderful. They seem to be a whole new breed of people. So that was my first inspiration. The second was a curator called Gary Proctor, and who for 20 years has been the manager of the most remote Aboriginal Arts Centre in Australia, located at a place called Warburton, which is about halfway between Alice Springs and Kalgoorlie. Unlike most other Aboriginal arts centres where the work is produced and sold, Gary decided quite early on that they should keep a lot of the work there, and so they had like a sort of a keeping place. But interestingly, hearing David Zhu talk about how certain things happen. Gary married a Chinese woman, Zhu Ling, and Zhu Ling really probably was the catalyst there. She and Gary developed a plan to take an exhibition of this work to China last year, and they decided that they would go to certain capital cities. They got quite a lot of funding from one of the mining companies, and they set up this tour. But it was much more than just a collection of paintings on the wall. They strove to be a sort of meeting place between two ancient civilizations, and they strove to explain the importance to both cultures of genealogy and the knowledge of the ancestors. So what Gary did was he gave cameras to all the local children, and they photographed local people and places, and they made sound recordings of the elders talking about their culture. They also made sound recordings of the desert wind, and all of these things appeared in the exhibition. So they then took all the texts that were associated with the paintings and the various works of art, and translated them all into Mandarin. They produced masses and masses of printed matter, and every time they went to a new venue for the exhibition, they would go several weeks ahead. They would gather school groups, university students, teachers, parents, all kinds of societies. They would show them, talk to them, and hand out all the stuff in Chinese. And the name of the exhibition was Tudi Shenti, which means our land, our body. Anyway, the show took off like a rocket, and not only were they absolutely deluged with audience, but other museums in China heard about it and said, well, we want it too. And so the tour went on and on and on and on. And just sort of reflecting on it, it is strange how two disparate projects like the late night live interviews and Gary Proctor and his translation, because this is the first time this has happened. See, I mean, there have been the occasion Aboriginal show in China, but they have never engaged with the community. They've never attempted to explain what Aboriginal culture really is. It's been much more on a sort of a museum, a more traditional museum model. So I thought, what about taking our ArtLink issue, the English one, what about taking it and translating it into Mandarin? Would that work? I mean, I just thought, if Gary Proctor could do it, well, why can't we? And then I discovered the Australian Studies Association were having a conference. And it was happening in July this year in Chengdu, in Sichuan province. So with the advice of the Australian Embassy, I got in touch with them and we began to negotiate a delegation to the conference and a launch of the issue and so on. And the Embassy helped us to find a wonderful translator in Beijing, and we got started on the production of translating and reprinting this thing. Australian studies in China began right at the beginning of the resumption of diplomatic relations 40 years ago. And the carriage of very powerful stuff and somewhat difficult, you know, even for audiences here. The thought of translating them into another language, let alone Chinese, was quite mind-blowing. So we were advised quite early in the piece that we would definitely have to have it translated in China. We couldn't have anybody here do it. And so the embassy found Forrest Yee, who is a wonderful worker, and she set about this task, and she finished 46,000 English words in about a month, which was absolutely extraordinary. But although she did have some experience in interpreting some Aboriginal art exhibitions and so on, we were very, very concerned about the accuracy of the Aboriginal words and the general sort of vernacular. And another very, very key person came into view, and this was the Chinese artist Zhu Xiaoping. Now, Zhu Xiaoping was trained as a traditional painter in China, but he left like David did in about 1989, and he came to Australia to learn about Aboriginal art. It's quite an extraordinary thing to do. He turned up in Alice Springs. Well, he turned up in Melbourne first and said, like Mirna said, where are the Aboriginal people? And they said, oh, go to Alice Springs. So he went there, and he ended up in Maningrida. And he spent long, long periods of time in Maningrida over the next 20 years. And he became part of the extended family of the famous Aboriginal painter, John Bullen. And he and John Bullen collaborated on an exhibition which went to China, and they made a film about it. So Xiaoping now lives in Melbourne. So I went to see him, and because I just thought this was so brilliant to have a Chinese speaker who actually is probably more conversant with Aboriginal culture than any of us are, and he agreed to look over all the translations, all the Chinese texts, and correct things where they were wrong, and there were many, many things that he changed. So but we are reasonably confident that most of it is more or less correct. The next learning curve for us was for our designer, Richard Browning. How was he going to lay this magazine out when he couldn't understand any of the Chinese? So this is where David came into it. David Zhu came to our rescue there and said, no worries, I'll work with Richard. I'll show him where this goes, where that goes, what's a title, what's an author name, what is a caption, and so on. He worked out this brilliant system, and it all went like clockwork. And finally, another very important little component in the success of this thing was that Helen Davies, standing here, my manager at ArtLink, had previously worked with the magazine, which was printed in China. So she had done 30 trips to the Pearl Delta, press checking her magazine, and she knew exactly what went on in Chinese printeries, and managed to avoid all kinds of things that could have gone wrong. So when we all arrived in Chengdu, all 6 of us, we had 6 Australians, 3 Aboriginal curators and artists, and Zhu Xiaoping, Stephanie Raddick, and me. The magazines were there. They were all in the delegates' satchels, and the conference was ready to roll.
The Confucius Institute opened the caption.
Oh, yes, sorry. And the Confucius Institute filled in the last little piece of the jigsaw puzzle by translating all the captions for us, because Forrest Yee had actually sort of run out of steam and had to go to London at that point, and we lost her. And Mo Gao very kindly got some of his staff to help us with the translation of the captions, which was wonderful. So here we are at the Jinyu Hotel, which is a place where a government-owned hotel, where all the important government meetings are held. So we were very privileged to be there, and we soon got to meet new friends and met up with all of these wonderfully lively delegates from all over China. Some of them were famous writers and poets, and others were doing research, and others were teaching. Some of them were students. And so we got to know them a bit, partly through attending their sessions and hearing their takes on all kinds of subjects from women's writing. There's some of our delegation there. Also, we used to meet up in this massive dining room where we enjoyed the most wonderful and varied Chinese smorgasbords for breakfast, lunch and dinner with not a hash brownie or egg and bacon in sight. Absolutely no concessions to Westerners, thank heavens. So we had a launch and presentation on the Saturday night, and many people came. And after Warwick Smith, the chair of the Australia-China Council, had spoken very warmly about the translation, curator John Mundine, whose features, and he's the man with the dreadlocks, who is a very important curator in Australia, who's been working in this field for at least 20 years or more. He gave a talk about the history of Aboriginal art. And this had the audience absolutely on the edges of their seats, because it was very hard. It was a very interesting situation. We also showed Xiaoping's film, Ochre and Ink, and again that was received with absolute silence, attention. They were obviously, this was something very new to those people, to that audience. Even though they were studying Australian studies, suddenly it came to life for them. There were people there who were speaking from the heart about what they do as artists and curators. And we really sort of felt something significant had happened. So, afterwards, a couple of things occurred to me. It occurred to me that given the artists in our group, and that's one of them, Archie Moore from Queensland. They're two Queensland artists, and John Mundine, who lives in Sydney. It just occurred to me that when Australian studies is taught in China or anywhere, the current emphasis, of course, is on literature. Mostly they're studying literature and history. It just occurred to me, well, why shouldn't they be studying visual arts? And if every Australian Studies conference had a delegation, a group of Australian artists there, how interesting would that be? So we're thinking about that. I don't know what we can do about it, but we have it in mind. So we're very grateful to all the people that supported us. We had funding from Copyright Agency Limited, from Arts Queensland and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in China. They all invested in this. It was done on a shoestring, I must say, but whatever funds we had were absolutely crucial to its happening at all. It was a great experience. It was extraordinary to be there in Chengdu. We didn't see a great deal of Chengdu. We were taken on a couple of excursions, one to see the pandas, and the panda base, which is a wonderful place. Will we continue to do this? Will we do the next ArtLink Indigenous in Chinese? I think so. I think we will. I think we've got such positive feedback that we feel it's probably something that we should do again, and so we're aiming for the next biennial conference, which will be in 2014, and after that we don't really know where it will take us. So thank you for your attention, and if anybody wants to ask questions of either of us.
Yeah, anybody wants a question to the two Stephanies?
Thank you.
We're offering subscriptions to ArtLink. Can we have a Chinese issue too? Oh, yes. Absolutely. Yeah, to have them sitting together
poetry some more. Question?
Yeah, I haven't got a question, but I'd just like to congratulate you, Stephanie, on your fabulous tenacity of making sure that important issues to Australia with individual arts culture are taken abroad. And I think this amazing connection with Mobo and Confucius Institute here at the University of Adelaide is a wonderful point maybe for us, Mobo, to think about what other kinds of things we could challenge Stephanie to take up. So I think we should give her a really proper round of applause.
We're a good team.
She also mentioned going online, with going doing an iPad version, mobile versions of the magazine.
Yes, well, Helen can tell us. You can. She did it.
Artleaf now is also available as an app on your iPad or iPhone. So, which goes to about 6,500, 7,000 downloads, and probably about 17%, 27 are actually from China.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot of interest coming from, which may have come from the conference as well.
Yes, possible. We don't really know quite what the flow of it is going to be. Whether those people who took them back to their universities will ever look at them again, or whether they'll become part of the legend or just go in the bin, who knows?
No, I think the impact is going to come a long way.
Ripple.
Yeah.
Effect.
I've no doubt about that. Yeah. It's great.
I'm interested in the image of the cover because I mean the sort of it's not kind of what you'd expect an Indigenous art cover to be.
Did you see that? That was here at the same state. Some of you did and some of you didn't.
Yeah, it's just because it's got so many meanings and it adds another kind of layer to the Indigenous art going to China sort of thing,
I mean, it's not stereotypical remote
it's not
area sort of thing.
It's another cultural element.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stephanie, what is the distribution then of
the Chinese one? Well, I mean, essentially, we've distributed it in China. We can't really, our thing is distributed. When it comes out, it goes out, to the news agents, to the subscribers.
It is available on our website, the Chinese edition is available.
But you can buy them,
But obviously we don't expect.
You weren't allowed to sell it either or have advertising, so it was a catalogue almost.
Yes, that's right, yes. We knew from experience, I mean, the issue about selling a foreign publication in China, especially if it's in Chinese, is very politically fraught. Fraud's the word, yes. So we were warned. The embassy sort of, stepped us through this issue. They said, look, you don't want to be subject to censorship. If the authorities need to view it beforehand, you'll never get it to the conference in time. You've got to think about these things. So, but happily, we didn't actually have to change anything in the magazine. We didn't need to censor anything. And I think this is one of the remarkable things about it, the fact that we just simply did not change anything in that magazine. We simply removed the advertising. And so it didn't look like a magazine, it looked more like a catalogue. So it was obviously not for sale, a non-profit thing for educational purposes to accompany our presentation. And as such, it now is kind of safe in that way. But so many people, I think, when they take a publication to a place like China, because they think the Chinese know nothing about it, in Australia, so they do a kind of a junior version of the truth. Well, this isn't the junior version, this is the real McCoy. This is like translating a book. You wouldn't think of taking a Peter Carey book and leaving bits out of it, would you? So that's where we feel very proud that we've actually done that.
I'm interested in were there any links with Indigenous peoples in China, and also picking up what Professor Gow about awareness or thinking about Indigenous people's history in China.
I think that's something that Gary Proctor's very interested in. He knows you have to take it very slowly, you can't just rush in. Take it very slowly.
Yeah. We were only in Chengdu for a few days, so we really had no opportunity to explore. And there may have been some, I mean, there are many minorities in Chengdu in Sichuan province, but we didn't actually really come across any people. No.
Yeah, okay. First of all, China is changing. It's so fast. I mean, for us it's difficult to catch up. But so when I say this about China, sometime maybe already out of date, 5 minutes later. But anyway, I think for the last at least couple hundred years, the Chinese are deeply impressed with this Darwin evolution theory, and that applies to society, sort of Darwinism. So they think the society, the people of the society has advanced or backward ones, advanced ones. Advanced societies like Western American and Europe and Australia, and backwards ones, including China itself. Therefore, China has to catch up. And so some people wouldn't be surprised, would think the Aborigines are primitive, you know, and they have a long way to go before they're civilized. I wouldn't be surprised if you come across Chinese who think this. But also, we have to be careful. We can't have to stereotype. We talk about some people, and some people who are not exposed to any of these things. But if you talk about artists that Stephanie mentioned, they don't think this way, and then the Chinese is changing fast. So it's this kind of linear, progressive, historicist view of race, ethnicity in society has been a long tradition in the past. Very strong tradition in China for the past 200 years. I think it's changing. So therefore, they do look down upon. They look up to the white. They look down upon themselves and any other people. And of course, Aborigine is down the ladder according to the kind of theory, the kind of ideas.
So are you saying Chinese is racist?
Eh?
Are you saying Chinese is racist?
Well, everybody is, in a sense.
Rationalised space.
That's right.
Most cultures.
I thought the Chinese thought they were up at the top. No.
Not at all.
Down at the middle or the bottom?
I thought it was England. Chinese people think the English is much better. Germany.
No, that's not what I have read, but I've read, you know, the Middle Kingdom is the centre of the world and, you know, the best people live
They might used to do that. Might used to do that before the Western impact.
Right.
Well, they still do. I think they still do. Just because they have lack of confidence in this area, they have to push themselves more higher.
So I'm talking about the past 200 years.
Right.
Before the impact of West, they thought they were civilized, the center of civilization. But when the West came along with all this superior technology and everything, they just completely collapsed.